It was. You just heard from Dr. Shuren. Obviously, he and his team are doing extraordinary work on behalf of innovators and the public health. And I'm very pleased to have with us now Leahey Trigg, who's the CEO of Outset Medical, also an MDMA board member. And she too is doing extraordinary work with her and her team during these very uncertain times. And what we thought we'd do over the course of the next, say, 20 minutes is talk a little bit about, number of issues that are facing executives in our space. Obviously, many folks are on the front lines. And there are many new normals as well. So again, Leahey, thanks so much for being with us here today virtually. I know we'd all like to be in person, but this is the new norm for now. And before we jump into it, obviously you've got a great career in medtech, starting off at Guidance. So maybe just a brief overview of the road that got you to Outset and a little bit about Outset, then we'll jump into our questions.
Sure. Well, I got into medtech after business school, and it was at Guidance first. I had never actually heard of a medical device, and really got lucky because a friend of mine at business school knew a friend at Guidance, and he happened to be hiring. So I really got lucky there, but I loved it. And I just love the pace of change. I was also looking at biotech at the time. And I think for a commercial person, medical device seemed to be the place to be, just because of the pace of product development and the opportunity to kind of deliver more and better to patients really rapidly year over year over year. But following a couple of years at Guidance, I had an opportunity to go into my first startup, which was in the breast cancer diagnostic space, and which was acquired by Cytech, and then had the good fortune to hook up with a group that was running Fox Hollow at that time. Spent a number of years launching the Silverhawk device at Fox Hollow prior to an acquisition by EV3, and then got involved with a company called Access Closure, also again in the cardiovascular space. And later with Lutonix, which was the first drug-coated balloon to be introduced to the U.S. market. It was through actually Lutonix, after Bard acquired that company, that Warburg Pincus, which was one of the major investors in Lutonix, had talked to me about the possibility of serving as an executive in residence. And what that entailed for me was working with 3 different portfolio companies they'd already invested in, working with those management teams on strategy and commercialization. And one of those companies was Outset. Well, it wasn't Outset at that time. It was called Home Dialysis Plus. And this was back in 2012. So for me, it's been an 8-year labor of love.
That's great. And maybe just a little bit about Outset for those who may be, obviously a lot in the news recently, but just a quick overview about the chronic issues that you're working to address.
Sure. Well, so we're based out here in now sunny, unfortunately not smoky, California, in near the San Jose airport. And we saw an opportunity to try to do the first, what we call sort of enterprise solution for dialysis, the first system that could be used anywhere from the ICU all the way to the home, and really try to kind of disaggregate, I think, the state of what we have today, which is one machine for this setting, a different machine for this setting, a different machine for this setting. And we thought about it, the analogy I use is sort of the proverbial Swiss Army knife. Instead of working with a bunch of different blades, could we make the Swiss Army knife itself? And that's what we set out to do. Really focused on, I'd say, simplification and cost reduction. I think the one benefit we had a lot of clarity right away on the problem we were trying to solve, which for us, we didn't think the problem necessarily was a clinical one or a science question. It really was the enormous and growing cost and complexity of delivering dialysis, which most health systems now are delivering dialysis across the enterprise, and therefore are incurring enterprise cost and complexity problems. And our mission became to deliver an enterprise solution.
Great. And so obviously you're working with this startup, being disruptive, plowing ahead, and then all of a sudden January, February, March hits, and we've got one of the most disruptive dynamics to our healthcare system. So can you just share with the audience here, obviously as a leader of an organization, how you as a company kind of adapted to dynamics associated with face-to-face, with dealing with manufacturing, just all the complexities that came to the forefront as a result of the pandemic?
Sure. Well, I think like many of us, I will never forget the day I really realized that the whole world was changing. I remember exactly where I was. I was at a Panera Bread in Nashville and really having a OMG moment. Nothing is ever really going to be the same. And so, of course, the first focus, well, we really had two immediate areas of focus. One was, did we have an opportunity to help? And while this certainly was not the original value proposition of Tableau, how could we have ever predicted that? What we did realize as an early hypothesis is maybe having something that was built for simplicity would help hospitals deal with surge demand. And we weren't sure at this very early moment that there was going to be surge demand. I think that followed as COVID seemed to be leading to greater rates of organ failure, inclusive of kidney failure. But we did think maybe we had an opportunity just through the simplicity of the device to allow hospitals to just respond to greater acute dialysis demand by enabling even non-dialysis trained nurses. Dialysis nurses are always in short supply, and never more so than during COVID. And so the ability for a health system to be able to use the resources that it had to deliver, really high quality of care, but perhaps using an expanded team, became really, really important. So that was focus area one. Could this device be helpful in a new way we had never thought of? So we spent a lot of time rapidly on that question. And then, of course, the second question was, how are we going to organize ourselves? And it was different and not different. I mean, we have a very large field-based team. We have field service engineers, we have clinical field specialists, of course, we have a sales team, and they were already virtual. And that was probably at that time, about half of our company. So I think we were aided by half of our company already knowing how to be effective and productive virtually. So we actually kind of did some cross training and learned a lot and leaned on a lot our field team for some of just the practical and tactical tips that we ended up applying to the whole company, as we by mid-March were 100% virtual.
Great. And you noted too that obviously you were working to adapt, see how your solution maybe could have a greater impact in COVID. And I know that, you had traditional submissions underway as well. We just heard from Dr. Shuren. Can you talk a little bit about, again, as you're trying to advance, some of these key, deliverables and milestones for the company, the experience of, for example, working with FDA, how did that change or not change as you and your team, again, try to advance and improve patient care?
Sure. Well, this certainly was a bit of an unknown. As everybody working within the FDA, back again, taking us back to mid-March, obviously was grappling with the personal and the professional, as we all were. But I would say, looking back on it, the level of collaboration, responsiveness, and urgency coming out of FDA, in our experience, was only even greater. And we already had been enjoying a really collaborative relationship with FDA, and one that we really enjoy. They just further raised the bar. So I have nothing but positive things to say. I appreciate. I know it sounds like I just missed Jeff, but appreciate not only Jeff but everybody within our branch chief, starting with the branch chief. In helping us continue to kind of move our file along, despite all of, again, the personal and professional struggles that I'm sure they were facing at the same time. Yeah,
and again, as we discussed here with Jeff earlier, again, this is, I think, one of the takeaways from this whole experience is that, just Leslie, as you running your organization, ways to adapt and move forward. I think FDA and industry and our interactions have evolved, and just the regulatory process. And so I think we are optimistic that some lessons learned here to make the process more efficient, effective, can be memorialized when it comes to whether it's the next user fee reauthorization or just even the responsiveness. I think obviously with people working remotely, we've heard, and maybe this is your team as well, that there are limitations to it, but also kind of provides sometimes more hours in the day, and that certainly is what we've heard from the FDA side. And again, I appreciate everything that they've been doing as they've again, in these very extraordinary times, trying to balance the emergency EUAs coming in the door and the traditional products that are coming through. But yeah, and in addition to, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, again, thinking back, we were hearing from team members within the branch during the weekend, really late at night their time, early in the morning. So it was very clear to me that they were doing everything in their power to accelerate. It wasn't just about keeping up. I mean, my view was that they were really trying to kind of reach for more, and pulled out some pretty extraordinary progress steps in the process. So we were really, really, really grateful for it.
Absolutely. And in addition to everything we just discussed and advancing the ball and bringing new products to the market to treat in the front lines of COVID. From a business perspective too, you're also kind of advancing on important milestones. As it's been reporting, obviously you just had an IPO recently. It's been very successful. Not trying to get into sensitive information, but just again, as a CEO, doing the road show and in kind of this virtual environment as well. Can you just talk a little bit about, again, when you map out, I'm sure when you started with your team and the strategic plan at the beginning of the year or mapping out the end of last year, the 5-letter COVID acronym wasn't in place, but obviously you persist. And so just the whole dynamic of taking a company public over the last 6 months, I'm sure has been a unique journey. So I'd love to, if you could just share a little bit about that process, and if there are other companies maybe exploring that path, what were some of the things that you wish you had known maybe, or that you can share with others who may be along that path?
Well, gosh, there's always a lot I wish I would have known in hindsight. I don't know that I can contain it just to the IPO, but I will answer your question. I am definitely old enough to be old-fashioned about relationship development, and I think the process of raising money, whether you do it privately or publicly through an IPO, is really about developing new relationships with investors that you don't know. So I was very old-fashioned about that. When the bankers started to socialize, hey, you're probably going to be doing this through Zoom, I was not happy about it. I went through, it's almost like a grieving process. No. We have to be in person. No, this is like for sure by September. Absolutely, we're going to get this done. I think the final nail in the coffin was really realizing like, well, okay, entry into New York from California is a 14-day quarantine. Like, how do you even that's not even possible. And a lot of the investors with whom we spoke were actually not in New York either, as so many have sought shelter in other parts of the United States. So that was kind of where I started from. I think now, being on the other side of it, I'm not sure we should ever go back to an in-person roadshow. So I did a kind of a full spectrum shift. I heard Adina Friedman, who's the head of NASDAQ, talk about the possibility of, hey, maybe this IPO process will be permanently different. And I would certainly endorse it. I don't think that it inhibited our ability at all, actually, to again, what are we doing? We're forming new relationships for a very long time in the future. And in some ways it enhanced it, because we had the ability to quite literally be invited into somebody's home versus kind of the rotating carousel of anonymous conference rooms that otherwise would have served as the backdrop. I really remember every investor we met with, and part of why I remember them is not only the faces, but also their backgrounds. And so it was an opportunity for us to be able to get, and for them too with us, I suppose, to be able to get certainly a better instinct or an insight into their personality through a little bit more.
Maybe then we have a couple more minutes here. Maybe just if beyond the IPO, again, lessons learned. You talked about how you already had kind of a virtual team in place for half of them with your sales force, but again, just the way from an executive running the company, things that you see or have learned from to help shape maybe where we go in the future.
Well, and we're continuing to evolve. So I don't want to represent that we have all this figured out. I think one of my biggest concerns, quite frankly, is how do you grow? It's one thing to try to keep a culture that was already built with people that you had an in-person relationship with, and now you're going virtual. It's another thing when you're really growing the employee base quite rapidly. And so we've had, like many companies, so many employees that have joined via Zoom, and we've never met them before. I mean, these things were unthinkable to me that, if you would have asked me 9 months ago, would I ever interview or hire somebody I'd never met? No way. I was very old fashioned. So I think in general, it really has opened my eyes and pushed my thinking to what's possible. And I think for Outset, we are certainly moving to a more virtual distribution. I think we've always been focused on, right DNA, necessarily more than like right zip code. But with COVID, I think we've become even more willing to embrace that what truly matters is the content of the contribution and the quality of the thinking. and the commitment to the mission much more so than where somebody lives. So I think it's really, long story short, I think it's really changed the way we're thinking about recruiting on the front end. And then I would tell you, to be honest, we're still doing a lot of experimentation around now how do you build on top of a culture that exists in a virtual environment. But in general, we're going to probably smaller group environments on Zoom and trying to foster more sort of personal interactions. Whereas maybe early in COVID, we were doing large all company meetings because we want to keep communication high and things were changing very, very rapidly. But I think we're probably going to continue to go in the opposite direction now. How do we create more personal connectivity between individuals and between small teams? I think is one thing, you know, we're starting to experiment more with over Zoom.
That's great. And just in the last couple of minutes we have here, again, we've heard obviously from Administrator Vermer and Tamara Sarek Jensen about some of the, I think, extraordinary work that's going on at CMS. Again, some of this started pre-COVID. You had Administrator Vermer at our annual meeting last year talking about some coding reforms, some payment reforms. Obviously, this MSIT program, the Medicare coverage for innovative technologies, has been important. But obviously, you know, in your space and end-stage renal disease and kidney dialysis, there have been both on the FDA front and on the CMS front, I think, a recognition about this, a better way to treat these patients, and obviously with additional new tech add-on payments out there, and kind of the Kidney X initiative. So maybe in just closing here too, just share a little bit about, you know, and again, let's be frank, right now, Washington and the dynamics here are not always constructive. There's a lot of polarization, but when you drill down into the agencies, into the public health officials, there are a tremendous number of those who are dedicated, passionate about advancing public care, and that's reflected, I think, in the policies that they're putting forward. So maybe in the last couple of minutes here, just talk a little bit about, you know, in addition to, you know, interactions with FDA and the responsiveness, but just, you know, CMS seems to be leaning in here too, making sure that both from a regulatory and a reimbursement standpoint, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, so that patient access can be realized. And just thoughts on kind of the direction they're going and how this may impact, you know, the patient community that you serve.
Sure. Well, I would say I will start with I am impressed and thrilled. I think some of these changes have been talked about for 15 years, but you know, I mean, it takes tenacity and I will say temerity on the part of the agency to actually implement some of the ideas that you just talked about, from, you know, from the TPONIs, the new technology add-on payment, to also the inclusion of ESRD patients in Medicare Advantage is going to have, I think, a significant influence on where patients are ultimately dialyzing. And we think, again, kind of more home, less clinic. And then also, I think the recent details that have been revealed on the ETC, the mandatory model, really demonstrate a commitment that goes much deeper than the rhetoric. It was great to hear. I mean, that was the first exciting part, but, you know, probably even more profoundly and impactful now that it is really coming to life. What probably excites me the most about being in the field of dialysis now is that it is so dynamic now. You know, that this was a space that, for all sorts of different reasons, it really had not changed much since the 70s in terms of the service model and the care delivery model. And I feel really for the first time, at least since 2012, since I've been involved, like this is happening. This field is happening. And I think there's going to be a before picture and an after picture, again, in terms of the total approach to care, the when, where, and how patients dialyze. There's going to be a before picture and an after picture. And CMS is going to be, I think, reflected on as the pivot point between the two. So again, another agency that has really stepped up in a big way and followed the words with actions that we believe are going to have a very big impact on patient access in a whole host of ways over the next 5 to 10 years.
Great. Well, I know we're coming up on time. Any final thoughts or comments you want to share with your fellow medtech executives before we move on?
No, just wish everybody the best. And COVID has not been easy on Outset, and I can't imagine it's been any easier for any other medical device company. I think when I've talked to a whole variety of folks inside the medical device arena. What has impressed me more than anything is that there has been no time wasted on the, boo-hoo, let's go back, let's prevent things from changing. How do we go back to the way things were? I'll end on where I started. When I started at Guidant, the one thing that really stuck out is like, this is an industry on the move. Change, more, better, and different. And I have seen that every which way in the medical device and other fields, but particularly in medical devices, as I've watched what other companies have done. Nobody's wasted any time hoping and wishing that things were ever going to be different than they are, and it's just been all about the go forward. So just proud to be a contributing member to the community, and of course to the association as well.
Great. Well, Lesley, thanks so much again for your time today and all the great work you and your team are doing. It's a great example, I think, of the passion, the persistence, and execution delivering on behalf of patients. So thanks again. I wish you all the best as you move forward. And now we'll move on to our next session.
Thank you, Mark. Enjoy.